We live in an age that pretends desire is simple, that sex is only about the body, only about pleasure, only about the heat of the moment. But beneath the surface, something far older and far more dangerous moves. Every choice of attraction, every secret fantasy, every unspoken longing, these are not accidents. They are symbols. They are signals of power. Today, we will uncover why sexual selection is one of the most reliable ways to measure a man's place in the invisible hierarchy, and why the fantasies men create are rarely about pleasure alone, but about something darker, something more primal. By the end, you will see your own desires in a different light, and perhaps the truth will unsettle you. And sexual selection as a mirror of power is an ancient truth that hides in plain sight, woven into the fabric of human history. Across civilizations, from the earliest tribal gatherings to the glittering courts of empires, desire has rarely been blind. The faces and forms that captivated the masses were almost always attached to figures who held sway. Whether through wealth, intellect, physical prowess, or the subtler arts of influence, it was never simply about beauty in isolation. Beauty without the aura of power often went unnoticed, while the presence of power, even in an unremarkable vessel, could ignite fascination. This is because attraction is not merely a chemical spark between two bodies. It is a primal compass, seeking out the traits that signal survival, protection, and dominance in an unpredictable world. When we look to the rituals of ancient monarchies, we see this law at work. Kings and rulers rarely lacked companionship, not merely because of their resources, but because their position projected the archetype of the protector and the conqueror. In times of scarcity and danger, these qualities were not luxuries, they were lifelines. To be desired was to be validated as a force capable of shaping reality. This connection between attraction and power has outlived kingdoms, outlasted religions, and transcended cultures. In the modern world, the crown has been replaced by other symbols: fame, charisma, influence, mastery of a craft. But the underlying equation has not changed. Those who command attention in one arena often find themselves commanding it in another. Attraction is rarely divorced from dominance because dominance itself carries an unspoken promise. It whispers of security in chaos, of victory in conflict, of a life that will not be easily threatened. Even in contexts where physical survival is no longer at stake, this deep instinct remains. A man who stands above others in competence or influence radiates something that cannot be faked. A gravitational pull that draws others in, whether they consciously understand it or not. It is not the loud assertion of power that attracts most strongly, but the quiet certainty of it. Those who truly possess it rarely need to boast. Their presence speaks the language of inevitability. Sexual selection thus becomes a silent ranking system. Without words, without votes, people unconsciously measure one another and assign places in a hidden hierarchy. This is not a hierarchy defined by formal titles alone, but by the intangible perception of value. It is the reason why leaders in any field, from art to politics, from business to war, often inspire attraction far beyond the boundaries of their physical appearance. They have been marked by the collective psyche as winners in the unspoken competition of life, and desire follows that mark like a shadow. The role of dominance in attraction is not always about aggression or control in the physical sense. It can manifest in the intellectual realm, in emotional mastery, in the ability to influence the currents of social life. A man who can bend reality to his will, whether through vision, strategy, or sheer force of personality, embodies a trait that evolution has coded deeply into the human response system. This is why the perception of status is so potent. It acts as a signal flare to the unconscious mind, suggesting that alignment with such a person offers not only pleasure, but a share in their sphere of influence. Even in our supposedly egalitarian age, where the language of power is often disguised beneath softer ideals, the instinct remains unchanged. Women may not speak openly of seeking dominance, just as men may not openly admit to desiring beauty, but the underlying drives still shape choices and patterns. The visible indicators of strength, social proof, reputation, command over one's environment, still elevate a man in the sexual marketplace. And this elevation is not just about access to partners, it is a reflection of how deeply sexual selection is tied to one's perceived place in the hierarchy of life. The man who is most desired is rarely the one who simply offers comfort or charm alone, but the one whose presence suggests that aligning with him means stepping into a larger story, one of security, triumph, and significance. Sexual fantasies often reveal unconscious archetypes of control, conquest, and surrender, woven from the same ancient threads that guided human behavior long before the written word. They are not random images drifting through the mind. They are symbolic dramas in which the psyche rehearses timeless roles. These fantasies are portals to the collective unconscious, where myth and instinct merge, where the characters are not merely lovers, but embodiments of forces older than civilization itself. When one imagines dominance, they are not simply envisioning an act. They are summoning the archetype of the ruler, the commander, the one who bends reality through sheer will. When one dreams of surrender, they are not merely picturing passivity. They are invoking the deep trust or terror of yielding to something greater, of dissolving into the current of another's power. At their core, these archetypes are not about the act of sex alone, but about the psychic interplay of strength and vulnerability. The fantasy of control, for example, is not merely the desire to dictate another's actions. It is the symbolic claiming of territory, the assertion that one's will is supreme in a given moment. This mirrors the conquests of kings and generals, the planting of flags on new soil, the primal satisfaction of knowing that one has triumphed in competition. Conversely, the fantasy of surrender is not about weakness. It can be about the intoxicating relief of laying down burdens, of entering the sanctuary of someone else's command, of dissolving into a greater force without fear of annihilation. These primal dynamics are not bound to gender, though they often manifest in patterns shaped by biology and culture. The archetype of the conqueror has been immortalized in countless myths, from warriors taking cities to gods, claiming mortal brides. The archetype of the willing captive appears in equal measure, from legends of maidens offering themselves to divine lovers to heroes submitting to higher powers. Such images persist not because they reflect literal events, but because they speak to deep psychic needs. The need to express power and the need to experience transformation through another's power. What makes fantasies so revealing is that they bypass the conscious mind's polite narratives and social masks. A person may live outwardly restrained, humble, or even submissive in daily life, yet in the private theater of the mind, they may play the role of the all-powerful sovereign or the untouchable seducer. Others who appear outwardly dominant may secretly fantasize about surrendering completely, not from weakness, but from a desire to taste the freedom that comes with relinquishing control. In both cases, the fantasy is not an accident. It is a psychic counterbalance, an unspoken attempt to explore parts of the self that waking life does not permit. These fantasies also reveal that sex, in its deeper layers, is rarely only about physical pleasure. Pleasure is the surface wave, power is the deep current. In the fantasy, pleasure and power are intertwined so tightly that they become indistinguishable. To control another is pleasurable, not merely because of the act itself, but because it affirms one's potency in the most intimate arena. To be controlled is pleasurable, not only for the sensations it brings, but because it allows one to dissolve ego and responsibility, to be carried by a force that feels ancient and inevitable. This is why the language of sexual imagery so often borrows from the language of war, religion, and myth. Because the mind understands that these moments are about more than the flesh. The persistence of these archetypes in fantasies across cultures and centuries suggests that they are not products of individual imagination alone, but expressions of something inherited. The human mind carries within it the memories of countless generations, each shaped by struggles for survival, dominance, and alliance. In those struggles, control and surrender were not games. They were matters of life and death. The modern fantasy is a symbolic echo of those ancient realities, a way for the psyche to rehearse, revisit, and perhaps resolve the primal tensions it has carried since the dawn of humanity. Even when clothed in modern settings, corporate offices, city streets, anonymous encounters, the roles remain the same. The conqueror and the conquered, the ruler and the ruled, the one who gives and the one who takes, circling endlessly in the private landscapes of desire, playing out scenes that speak to the deepest structures of the human soul. A pornography functions as a modern oracle of desire, a mirror held up to the unconscious where the raw, unfiltered yearnings of men are laid bare. It bypasses the social scripts, the moral justifications, and the carefully curated self-image that a man presents to the world, revealing instead the instinctive patterns that operate far beneath conscious awareness. In the private consumption of such imagery, a man is not merely seeking entertainment. He is participating in a ritual of projection, stepping into a space where he can confront his deepest wants without fear of judgment. The screen becomes a confessional, a canvas, and a stage upon which his unspoken fantasies take form. In this way, pornography operates much like the ancient oracles who spoke in cryptic visions. Just as seekers once traveled to Delphi or other sacred sites to hear truths they could not articulate themselves, men turn to this modern medium for an encounter with their own psychic truths. The scenes, roles, and dynamics they gravitate toward are not random. They are symbols that point toward unmet needs, unresolved tensions, and archetypal desires. The man who repeatedly chooses scenarios of dominance is not necessarily obsessed with the act itself. He may be searching for affirmation of his potency, for a reminder that he has power in a world that often strips him of it. The man who seeks themes of surrender may be yearning for release from constant responsibility, for the experience of being carried by forces beyond his control. This is what makes pornography such a potent psychological map. It does not only reveal what is desired, but also the emotional and symbolic functions those desires serve. The surface image may be explicit, but beneath it lies a code that can be read for insight into the self. A preference for certain body types, scenarios, or interpersonal dynamics is less about objective beauty or novelty than it is about the psychic energy those elements evoke. A particular scene might represent victory, worship, rebellion, or belonging, depending on the symbolic meaning it holds for the viewer. In this sense, pornography is not merely a record of lust, but an atlas of the soul's hidden landscapes. The danger lies in mistaking the symbol for the substance. The mind often confuses the act of witnessing the fantasy with the act of fulfilling the underlying need. A man may believe he is satisfying himself through repetition, when in truth, he is feeding a hunger that grows precisely because it has never been met in the real world. The fantasy scratches at the surface of the yearning, but it never reaches the depth where transformation occurs. Yet the allure remains, because the imagery is vivid and immediate, and the unconscious is always drawn to anything that resembles its own symbols. To understand pornography as a wish fulfillment device is to see that it is not an escape from reality, but a refracted vision of it. The desires expressed in private often stem from the same forces that shape choices in relationships, careers, and ambitions. The wish to dominate in the sexual realm may reflect the same need to assert control in life's larger arenas. The wish to be overpowered may echo the longing for surrender to fate, to love, to forces that make life feel vast and uncontrollable. Each click and choice is an unconscious declaration. This is the kind of world I want to inhabit, at least for a moment. Over time, the map drawn by these choices becomes clearer. Patterns emerge, recurring archetypes, repeated narratives, persistent symbols. The man who is willing to examine them without shame may begin to see not just what he wants in moments of arousal, but what he has been chasing in the corridors of his entire life. The fantasy becomes a guide to the real wound, the real hunger, the real longing for significance, intimacy, or sovereignty. In this way, the modern oracle of desire offers not only pleasure, but a chance for self-revelation, for the stripping away of illusion, for the confrontation with the truths that polite conversation and public masks can never touch. Sexual interest is an unspoken form of valuation, a silent economy that trades in signals far more complex than mere physical appeal. Beneath the surface of attraction lies an ancient calculus, one that weighs beauty alongside the perception of strength, resourcefulness, and authority. It is a kind of instinctive marketplace where every glance, every lingering look, every spark of curiosity is an unvoiced acknowledgement of worth. This worth is not purely aesthetic. It is a holistic measure of what the other person represents in the grander game of survival, influence, and legacy. In this hidden economy, beauty serves as the opening invitation, the visible currency that captures initial attention. Yet beauty alone is not enough to sustain value, for it must be accompanied by qualities that signal stability and capability. Throughout human history, those who commanded resources, whether material, social, or intellectual, stood apart in the eyes of potential partners. They offered more than momentary pleasure. They offered the promise of a life, shaped by abundance rather than scarcity, protection rather than exposure, and influence rather than obscurity. This promise, whether real or imagined, is embedded in the subtle cues a person gives off: posture, speech, demeanor, and the way they carry themselves in the presence of others. Sexual interest is therefore not random, even when it feels spontaneous. The unconscious mind reads hundreds of micro-signals within seconds, calculating the likelihood that the person before us possesses traits that would be advantageous to align with. This is why someone with no conventional beauty can still be magnetic. If their presence suggests mastery over life's challenges, they are imbued with a kind of radiance that transcends physical features. A man who stands with the quiet assurance of someone who has conquered adversity will often attract as strongly, if not more so, than one who merely has symmetrical features or a sculpted physique. Authority plays a particularly powerful role in this valuation process. To be seen as a figure who can influence outcomes, command respect, and move the levers of social or material systems is to radiate a form of desirability that operates beyond conscious choice. This is why individuals in positions of leadership, whether in politics, business, or art, so often inspire attraction disproportionate to their looks alone. They project a signal of elevated status in the unspoken hierarchy, and this signal is received and processed in an instant. The unconscious reads authority, not merely as control over others, but as control over one's own destiny, which in turn promises stability to those who come close. Resourcefulness adds another dimension to this hidden currency. While authority can be inherited or conferred, resourcefulness is often the proof of adaptability, the sign that one can navigate changing circumstances without collapse. This adaptability is a deeply attractive quality because it speaks to survival in unpredictable environments. It is no coincidence that storytellers through the ages have celebrated the cunning hero, the one who overcomes obstacles not only through strength but through ingenuity. In the unconscious mind, aligning with such a figure increases the odds of thriving, both materially and emotionally. Strength, in this equation, is not limited to physical might. Emotional resilience, psychological stability, and the ability to remain composed under pressure are equally potent signals. The person who can remain unshaken when chaos swirls around them radiates a sense of safety that cannot be faked. This kind of strength becomes a silent promise that no matter what storms may come, they will stand as an unmovable anchor. Such a promise has a gravitational pull that can be felt even across a crowded room, drawing attention before a single word is spoken. In the modern world, this hidden currency of desire operates as powerfully as it did in tribal societies, though its markers may have changed. Wealth may now be signaled by subtle branding rather than physical possessions, authority by influence in digital spaces rather than by physical territory, and resourcefulness by creative problem solving rather than by hunting or building. Yet the unconscious mind does not care about the medium. It responds to the signal. Sexual interest becomes the unspoken acknowledgement that the person before us has something rare and valuable, something that could elevate our own position in the web of life. And while few will speak openly of this trade, the exchange continues endlessly, shaping who we notice, who we pursue, and who remains in the periphery, unseen despite all efforts to be noticed. To master desire, one must not merely indulge it, but confront the underlying hunger for significance, purpose, and mastery. Desire is often mistaken for a simple craving, a fleeting pull toward pleasure, beauty, or novelty. But its roots are far deeper. Beneath the surface lies a yearning that has little to do with the object of desire itself and everything to do with what that object symbolizes to the psyche. The beautiful face, the alluring body, the intoxicating experience. These are only mirrors reflecting an inner emptiness, a silent call to reclaim a part of the self that has been forgotten, neglected, or buried. This is why indulgence alone rarely satisfies. A man may feed his appetites endlessly and yet remain restless, haunted by a sense of incompletion. The hunger returns, sometimes stronger than before, because the act was never about the surface pleasure. It was about the quest for a deeper validation, the affirmation that one's existence matters in the grand scheme of life. To ignore this truth is to become enslaved by the very desires one seeks to control. Each indulgence then becomes another chain, another distraction, another step away from the real work of becoming whole. Reclaiming the inner sovereign begins with the recognition that desire is a messenger, not a master. It carries news from the hidden territories of the self, pointing toward the places where power has been surrendered. Perhaps it is the longing to be desired that reveals an unacknowledged wound in one's sense of worth. Perhaps it is the urge to dominate that masks a deeper fear of irrelevance. Perhaps it is the fantasy of surrender that whispers of exhaustion, of the longing to lay down burdens that have been carried too long. These messages are not meant to shame or condemn. They are meant to guide the individual toward the source of the hunger. To follow this path requires courage, for it is far easier to reach for the immediate satisfaction of indulgence than to confront the discomfort of self-examination. The inner sovereign cannot be reclaimed without facing the shadows that guard the throne: insecurity, fear, shame, and the illusions we have clung to about what will make us whole. This is a battle not fought with others, but with the fragmented parts of the self that have forgotten their place in the greater kingdom of one's being. Mastery, in this sense, is not about repression. It is not about denying the existence of desire, nor about pretending to be above its pull. It is about standing in the center of one's own power, so that desire can be acknowledged without being obeyed blindly. The sovereign hears the messenger, considers the message, and acts with purpose rather than compulsion. This is the difference between being carried away by the current and steering the ship with a steady hand. Purpose emerges naturally from this position of sovereignty. When one's energy is no longer scattered in the endless chase for fleeting pleasures, it can be gathered and directed toward building something of lasting value. Significance is no longer sought through the approval of others or the conquest of temporary prizes, but through alignment with a vision that resonates with the deepest truths of the self. The man who has reclaimed his inner sovereign becomes a creator rather than a consumer, a master of his own destiny rather than a captive of circumstance. In reclaiming the throne, the individual also transforms his relationship with others. No longer does he seek to extract meaning or worth from another's body or attention. Instead, he approaches relationships from a place of fullness, offering rather than grasping, leading rather than chasing. This shift is felt by others, often without a word being spoken, because true sovereignty radiates a quiet authority that is unmistakable. It is the presence of someone who needs nothing, and yet can give much. Someone who has found the wellspring within, and no longer depends on the shallow streams of external validation. This is the deeper promise hidden within desire, not the momentary intoxication of possession, but the rediscovery of the self as the source of its own fulfillment. To master desire is to see beyond its glittering surface and into the depths from which it rises, to walk past the tempting distractions and claim the seat of power that has always been waiting in the heart of one's own being.